And now I would invite those panelists, those people who have come tonight, who have been involved with Telstar Regional Middle School, to please come down and find yourself a comfortable seat down here behind these wonderful Telstar tablecloths and in front of the flag that Charlie has provided. Thank you all for coming tonight. I guess first thing I'd like to do is to ask each one of you to just give a brief introduction, tell us your name and your connection to Telstar High Middle School in the past and or the present, if you would do that. Charlie, would you like to start us off?
Sure, because I'm the rookie. As Mr. Morton had introduced me back in 1983 when I came to Bethel, and I wanted to teach. And I knew that Telstar was the local high school. I went to Telstar the day before school started in 1983, and I introduced myself to Walter Phillips, who was an interim superintendent at that point. They were in an administrative change. And I said to him, my wife and I are here in Bethel, and we would love to teach here. I know there's no jobs available right now, but I'm willing to do anything you need to have done. And he said, can you start tomorrow? I said, what? And he said, yeah, I need you 8th grade science. I said, but I'm a history teacher. 8th grade science, would you like, you said you'd do anything, so. I was there, and I spent that year ed teching at one point, subbing, whatever I could do, and in the spring of that year there was a job opening, and I went for that job, and my wife was with child at that time. I had no real job, and I was really hopeful. And Dwayne Craig saw me down on Main Street, and after my interview at some point he said, congratulations. I had my job. I had my dream job of teaching history in the high school. And I had the dream, I didn't know it at the time, but I had Mr. Abbott, who's next to me, and Mr. Morton to mentor me in the history department. And I had no idea at that time what I had just landed into. But I spent 22 years doing that. I then switched into administration, became the Dean of Students for 10 years. And at that point I needed a break from there, and I really had felt the need to have more contact with students. And so I resigned that position, and I took a year. I taught a little bit at Gould Academy in a winter ski program, but I miss Telstar, and I emotionally, mentally needed to be back there. And fortunately, I was given an opportunity to go back in an alternative coordination position where I help kids. And I have the best job of my life right now because I get to spend time with kids in a way that I cherish. And Telstar has allowed me to do that and to spend a career in education. And I'm very thankful to all of these people, because Kathy Newell, being in the adult ed department, also was very kind to me and welcomed me into that world and involved me in some of the filming projects that were just starting up with Channel 11 and all of those things. So I'm so happy, and I'm kind of pinching myself looking at this table and saying these people really made my career fantastic and very enjoyable. But that's my
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you. Rod?
Well, I came to Telstar in 1971. I was not an original. I had been at Buckfield for 5 years and Livermore Falls for 3. And I was hired to teach English, which I did for a number of years. And then I taught English and history for a number of years. And then I did the drug and alcohol education and taught history and English for a number of years. And I did a bunch of stuff. And I was very proud of the work that we did at Telstar. I think we had a wonderful faculty. And I think we did some wonderful things for the students there. And like Charlie, I'm very fond of Telstar and wish them well in whatever they do. That's me.
Great, thank you, Ron.
And
Kathy?
then you just couldn't give up teaching, you kept doing college classes.
Since she's dragged me into that, I will add, after 38 years and 30 years at Telstar, I retired in 2001. And I soon realized that I liked to teach. And so I got an opportunity to teach for UMA at actually I taught at 3 of their different sites. They have 8 around the state. And I have taught 15 years. And this semester starting Monday is going to be my last hurrah. Honest.
Lois agreed.
Yes.
Thanks, Ron. Kathy?
Sure. Well, actually, my arrival at Telstar was the fall of 1979, but I knew that Randy very kindly wanted adult ed included in this little, program about Telstar. So I was thinking, there was some adult ed going on there early on. And I happened to find a little publication that was, up in my office that was celebrating the 20th anniversary of comprehensive adult ed at Telstar. So it came out in 96 because the program itself had started in 76. But the people who put the program together for Telstar understood that there were many people in this area that had not completed high school. They, possibly went to work, haven't started families, whatever, but there were people who were waiting for the opportunity to have wonderful teachers like Rod, like Ted Davis, like Mac Davis, that would help them complete their high school diplomas. So the Telstar, when it opened in the fall of 1969, there was a small flyer issued by David Dennison of the guidance department, who was also serving as the adult ed director. They offered 13 classes for 15 weeks at the cost of $5 a course, and there was a good array of academic high school credit classes, things like woodworking, sewing, art, PE, basic machine tools, home wiring, the usual adult ed menu. And some of the people who taught at that time were Rick McCann, Felix Otero, Kay Davis, Ralph Nemi, Ted Davis, Martha Bangs, Floyd Keniston, David Tripp, who would go on to be a major adult ed teacher at Telstar and basically launched a number of businesses from his classes too. So, there were many connections between the day school folks and adult ed all those years. And then what happened is, Rodney and I were saying that when you got there, you remember teaching in the early phase of this. But it didn't, something happened and they didn't continue it. So when Ken Smith, I'm sure some of you remember him, came as a superintendent in 1976. And one of the things he did was to restart adult ed. Mari Wilson was the director for 3 years. At that time, I saw the ad in the paper for the director's job, and I said, well, with two little kids and teaching at Gould, you know, I can't apply for this job now, but it's my job. And very nicely, the woman left after 3 years, so I started and kept at it for 20-some years and enjoyed every minute of it, and I enjoyed being, you know, an occupant of the building. Sometimes I had a lot of connections with the teachers, especially if they were interested in moonlighting for adult ed, you know. We never got you, I don't think. No.
6 hours was enough.
Anyway, it was great, and the focus of adult ed was the usual, everything from literacy to high school completion to GED to hobby-type classes, and then eventually college courses, both satellited classes, but also the ITV classes were huge, and that made a tremendous difference to people in this area. So that's how I connect to Telstar, and I still enjoy going and hanging out at the place, and you know, it's a wonderful school.
Bill?
Okay, I guess now we better get some real history. In March of 1968, I was going to USM, and I was told that in a room in Corthell Hall, there would be a group of superintendents that would be seated there, and that if we were interested in interviewing them, we could go over and interview superintendents. So I walked into this room, and here are all these superintendents of various school systems sitting around. And we, meaning there was probably 5 or 6 of us, began to ask these superintendents questions. Why would I want to come to your school district and teach? Sitting in one corner was Ralph Ryder, and I liked some of the things that he was saying, and he also said, this is a brand new school, it isn't even off the ground yet. We'd love to have you come up and take a look at it. And then I looked over here and I saw the superintendent from Oxford Hills, and he was saying how what a wonderful school they had and how it was growing and it was going to be a big school eventually and they're going to build a new building and all of this stuff. So in April, I went to visit Telstar, and I was taken to the building by Walter Ruach, who was the head of the social studies department. And he took me into the building, and I was walking on dirt floor. And I said, what is this? And he said, well, this is the cafeteria. It was dirt floor, it had no windows in it, there was nothing but cement and blocks. And I said, oh, okay, well. Anyway, that worked out pretty well. So I had a job with Oxford Hills for $5,700 a year. That was my starting pay. And I went to Ralph Ryder and I said, I think I'd like to teach SAG 44, but I got this contract already from Oxford Hills. And he says, what are they paying you? And I said, $5,700. He said, well, our starting salary is $5,300. But if you're interested, I can have you coach baseball for $200 and coach basketball for another $200, and that will equal $5,700. What a rookie. I said, great, super, I'll take it. So I ended up in a building that when September 1st rolled around, it wasn't ready to go at all. So for 2 weeks, the entire staff went through workshops and things run by NTL, National Training Laboratories. And that was an experience for me because I came from a very, very conservative high school and a very conservative family. And to be experiencing these things from NTL was quite something else. That went on for 2 weeks, and we heard all these promises and how this was going to be a new school, and they were bringing in every new educational philosophy possible, everything. Students don't have to go to class if they don't want to. I had a hard time with that. They can go anywhere in the building they want to whenever they don't have a class. it was a total liberal beginning. And I look at that today, and I've got my schedule here, that I'll be year 1, 68. And I really think that if the powers that be today at Telstar looked at this schedule, I think it would fit very nicely in with the things that they're trying to achieve, whether it be, what's the diploma? Competency? No. Proficiency.
Yeah.
Proficiency diplomas and kids doing projects and meeting goals and all of that. This schedule would fit very nicely in with what they're trying to do. I think probably there were 2 administrators that I will always hold on high, and one was Dr. Wayne Gerson, who changed my teaching all around. It was wonderful. I mean, I really look back at what he did for me, and if I had any success at Telstar ever, he was responsible for part of that in what he got me to do. The second person, and I was kind of hoping he might be here tonight, but Ted Davis. Ted changed my life completely as far as teaching. He came up to me one day and he said, "Have you ever heard of this thing called advanced placement?" And I said, "No." He says, "Well, I'm going to send you to Hebron this summer and you're going to learn it. And you'll come back next fall and you'll be teaching advanced placement." Okay. That changed my life and my teaching career tremendously. And then, of course, working with these characters over here was probably the highest point in my life. When the three, if I may, when the 3 of us were teaching social studies, to me that was the high point. That was the zenith. Rodney has 38 years of teaching. I have 49 years of teaching. Charlie has...
Well, I've been there 37 now.
37. So I remember the night when we were giving awards, and the 3 of us stood up at the microphone, and I said, "Before I start giving out the awards, I'd like to have you people look at this triumvirate and realize that you're looking at a century of teaching." And to me, that was a moment. I mean, you talk about when you had those moments. That to me was extremely important. I had the great fortune of teaching with these 2 people over here. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Great. That's good, Bill. That's very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. I thought I'd take a bit of a break and I'd share something with all of you. Recently we were cleaning out, and Will remembers this, we were cleaning out the basement of the coal block. And one of the things we found was a brand new stack of the Bethel County Citizen Special Edition from July 10th, 1974. And in 1974, obviously, this house was completed, the restoration was completed, and it was dedicated and open to the public, dedicated in memory of William Bingham II. And Kathy and Stanley worked on this publication. We've had several special editions that the local paper has published. And in here, we dug these out, and these are free, so I hope you'll take one. It's just full of great photographs and interesting articles. But Kathy and Stan were in touch with a number of people to write articles on various topics. And one of the articles that appeared in here, and again, this is only 6 years after Telstar opened, was written by Madeline Gibbs. And Bill may remember when I did my student teaching experience at Telstar 44 years ago, and it was Telstar that brought me here, even though I'm a Rumfordite, not too far away, and my mother's family's from Bethel.
It was that year, too.
And it was this year,
That
right.
1974.
And it was in 1974, and the early part of the year, I was student teaching for Peter Brown, and teaching social studies and Maine history, getting the students overly excited on Maine history. But Madeline Gibbs wrote this article, and I just want to read a couple of excerpts from it, and this will fit right in with what Bill has said. Telstar Regional High School, after a 3-day orientation period to familiarize students with the new building and modular scheduling, Telstar Regional High School held classes for the first time on September 19th 1968. The 669 students, and this was grades 7 through 12, 669 students comprising grades 7 through 12 came from the SAD 44 towns of Andover, Bethel, Greenwood, Newry, and Woodstock. Prior to this date, students from these towns had attended Andover High School, Gould Academy, and Woodstock High School. And I'd also mention some who were tuitioned also went to Stevens High School in Rumford, which is where I went for 2 years, then went to Rumford High School for 1 year, which is now Mountain Valley. So I have a class ring for a school that doesn't stand anymore. I have a diploma for a school that doesn't exist anymore. So lots of changes. They attended those schools, but with the advent of the district facility, the two separate high schools were discontinued, while Gould Academy became primarily a college preparatory school for boarding students. Besides the traditional high school subjects in business education, English, foreign languages, home economics, industrial arts, mathematics, science, and social science, Telstar offered also several courses in fine arts, graphic arts, music, and practical arts, as well as a complete program in physical education, and provided in addition a guidance department, health suite with a resident nurse, who has since become a district nurse, and a large library. Before the end of the first school year, adult education courses were made available for area residents. At one time, driver training classes were offered, but usually these are held during summer vacation periods. And then, again, getting back to what Kathy said, last year the cooperative education program was instituted under the direction of David Dennison, and on and on. Then, this goes to page 18, it says, although Telstar opened its doors to students on September 19th, several areas of the building were not yet completed. For instance, it wasn't until November 5th that Superintendent Ralph Ryder and his staff were able to move into their offices. It was also November before the gymnasium was ready for use. However, steady progress toward completion was made, and the formal dedication was held on June 8th, 1969. The following was quoted from a write-up about that event in the June 10th, 1969 issue of the Lewiston Daily Sun. The dedication and open house for Telstar Regional High School was held Sunday. The school is named after Bell Systems Telstar communication satellite in Andover, a history-making satellite that in 1962 relayed the first telephone and television picture between Andover, Maine and Europe. And our trustee, Mike Sowell, was right there from the very beginning and has donated an incredible collection of items related to Telstar that are on display next door. The high school is located in Bethel, approximately 20 miles from Andover ground station, which is now part of a global commercial satellite system. An actual size model of the Telstar satellite was presented to the high school by Tracy L. Gray, Division Plant Manager, American Telephone and Telegraph Company. Gray, the keynote speaker, also presented a bronze plaque which notes the historical significance of the Telstar project. And I'm sure most of you know that within the last few years, that satellite model was restored and is on display in the school, and it's well worth seeing. And I remember when I would go to performances in the auditorium, seeing that poor model and thinking, gee, something good ought to happen here, and it did. So that, for those responsible for that, I thank you.
That was a scary time to see that in the back of the auditorium with maybe gum on it or other things. I used to bring my class down, from the hallway and to show it to them because they didn't know what it was. And this was the name of your school. And I'm just pleased that right now that has a very nice position of honor. It's been restored beautifully. It's in a nice cabinet. There's lights around it. But when I think about where that was and who could have just, taken little pieces of it if they wanted to.
Or dribbling it.
And it's life size.
It had the spring on top. That was always a temptation to dribble the satellite. I remember that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. Well, you've answered some of the other questions that I had here. I guess this is for anyone, and some of you have already mentioned this. Curious to know what people can you name as having had a positive effect on others, both staff and students at Telstar. And some of you have already mentioned some of those people, but Is there anyone else that you'd like to point out that either was at Telstar or perhaps still is at Telstar that you think had a real positive effect on the student body and the school in general, I guess?
Well, I would think Dwayne Craig, I think someone has mentioned.
I was gonna say Dwayne Craig if you didn't,
Yeah.
because he actually hired me too,
He
so
came
honestly.
as a superintendent from Shakopee, but he instituted a lot of the, experiential education, things, that now are considered novel too, but Dwayne had it.
Well, and the Outward Bound program
Right.
that Gould Academy continues to do their outdoor winter program, but Dwayne brought to Telstar a program where we took every sophomore out into the mountains, into different groups where they would, in the winter, and climb for 5 days, climb a mountaintop and learn about working together and outdoor skills, and it was one of the most, I still to this day, those years that those kids did that, when I see them now, that's what you talk about. That's what they remember.
And that pretty much is what goes on at Gould nowadays, right? That type of experience is
But
very-
there are still some of the vestiges of it, like, doesn't
Well, Steve Keene,
still does
who
some.
did an outdoor skills leadership
Yeah.
program for many years, and right now he still has this Telstar Challenge, which is the last vestige of that. But we were talking today about Outward Bound and Dwayne Craig
Yeah.
and how we got that lift to do those things.
I think Dwayne's, one of his strong points was he really was able to reach out into the community, and he really did a huge amount with Rotary, but he also involved NTL type
Oh, yeah.
involvement with the high school.
He was also the guy that at 4:15 in the morning would be shoveling the
Shoveling
sidewalk.
steps.
And he'd beat the custodians there, because the guy didn't sleep, and he would do anything and everything that he expected anybody else to do.
And it wasn't just the front door.
No,
I drove up to the back door, and I look, and there's my superintendent shoveling off the steps for me,
right.
and I'm gonna echo Dwayne Craig also. He instituted a cycle of curriculum development for each major subject area. So at one time, I was K-12 social studies curriculum coordinator. In that time, I felt like, okay, we're going somewhere. Because everybody in the school district, if you taught third grade and you were in Andover or Bethel or Woodstock, you know you're going to be teaching the same thing. The kids are getting the same picture. And people teaching ninth grade knew what eighth grade teachers had covered and done. It was a miraculous thing. And he supported it financially. Don't
Okay.
ask me how, but he did. And that was, wow, haven't seen that in a long time.
Was he saying, Bill, personally, or as a fundraiser, as a good fundraiser for getting funds from outside the community, or you think he's doing it on his own, filling in the gaps where they appeared?
I don't know much about money.
Or teach.
But one of the things that I'd like to say about Dwayne Craig is, what impressed me, I think most, was his enthusiasm,
Yes.
his positive attitude. We can do this. And that's a remarkable thing to have at the head of your educational system.
You know, another thing about Dwayne was,
Grant writer, too.
Mhm.
yeah,
He certainly, the other thing with Dwayne is that if you went to him with an idea, he never said no. He might come up with ways to improve it, but, certainly it was the heyday of adult ed grant writing and federal grants. He just, and I think he was the same way when he went over, after he finished at SAD 44, he was the head of the region, 9?
9?
Yeah,
Yeah.
adult ed, regular career in tech ed over there.
I think Dwayne, the type of learner he was, he was a model for realizing that everybody learns differently. So he was open to different types of teaching and different types of learning. And I think that's what I was impressed with, is that he was a learner himself, and he loved to learn. And I think that's why he didn't sleep. He was too busy doing something else. And I mean, he was a little bit accident prone too, and he always limping around, and, you know, because he was doing so many things. But what a great model for the teachers and for the students to see somebody who embraced learning and just loved life.
Now, he was there for what period? What were his years? Anyone?
Well, he was there to hire me in 1984.
He was there in '83, I think, he came in.
And for how long?
Oh, 10 years maybe, yeah. I think he probably could have stayed longer, but he was ready for a change.
Yeah.
And Dwayne's passion was always the CTE type student, or alternative ed, even better from his point of view, you know,
Yeah.
so.
You asked a question about influences, that sort of thing. And I enjoyed teaching everything that I ever taught. But the thing that I think changed the way I looked at things, more than anything else, was when I did the drug and alcohol education program. Because it was during that period of time that we ran groups, and I met with students individually, and I learned things about young people who are dealing with substance abuse, both among themselves and among their families. That stunned me. I did it for really quite a few years. And finally, I got to the point where it was becoming overwhelming to me. And I remember going to Ted Davis and saying, if you would put me back into the classroom full time, I'd appreciate it. And I got to know those young people so well. And many of them influenced me just because of their experience. So I'm grateful for that. It made me understand some things that I had only seen hints of before.
And now you counsel them on Facebook.
Occasionally. Yes.
Well, and I know Rod would be very humble about this, but his Facebook posts are inspirational to, I don't care. There are so many students that I look at that comment to Mr. Abbott and respect his view and are still being taught by Mr. Abbott, and are so thankful that they have that opportunity. And for me to just watch the interchange. And when I get down or I'm a little bit off, I can go to Rod's page and it picks me up, because he's always got a quote. It's always maybe a little controversial, and in this day and age, everybody's got an opinion about something. But the way that Rod can handle almost any situation and bring it to either some useful conclusion or at least a civil discussion. And I just appreciate that I have that to go to. And so many of the students, and they were my students too, but they really appreciate and still value what you say and what you bring to the conversation.
That's really quite remarkable. I enjoy that Facebook thing more than I probably should. But it is very nice to be able to keep in touch with people. Teaching is a strange thing in one way. Well, it's probably more than one way. But, you get to know someone, and then they're gone. And so, you know, somebody that you just get to the point where you are interacting with them and you know them and you care for them, and then they're gone. And the Facebook thing, in a very surprising way, has brought back a lot of those students that I've lost contact with, and I love it. Now, they don't agree with me politically many times, but that's okay. And that's what I'm trying to get across to them. That it's okay not to agree. And you don't have to bash people, you don't have to, whatever.
You know, I think it's not only Rod's students, but I think a lot of us that are on Facebook that have known Rod or know some of the people that he knows, and so that it just comes down to the fact there's nothing wrong with civility. You can disagree with someone, but you know, when a few years ago someone said, well, isn't it great that the internet has given everyone a voice? And I go, gee, that's kind of a shame, really, because a lot of people have a lot of time on their hands, and they post things when maybe they should just maybe keep watching television or something.
Well, I'd like to add one more thing.
Sure.
And this is probably going to shock Charlie, but I've been trying to think of things that were turning points in Telstar's history. I think one of them was when we established satellite groups, which was to have a teacher mentor or advise a group of students that were a combination of 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders all in one room. And they might all be students that you don't teach. They're just students. We divided up and did that. That, coupled with senior presentations that you had to pass to graduate, I think did a great deal for a lot of kids. Knowing that at some point they were going to have to stand up in front of a group of adults and their peers and present a topic and be graded on that topic. I don't think there was anything like it. I'm an introvert. It scared the heck out of me to think that I would ever have to do that. But I saw kids that you'd think would never speak anywhere accomplish some really wonderful things. And when we lost all of that, that part is a shame. How's that? That shock you that I brought up satellite groups?
If they only knew the trepidation I went through when I had to tell you about the satellite
Yes,
group and we're gonna do
it wasn't
this.
what I
Says
wanted.
Bill's, you know, he's a teacher and he likes, his comfort zone isn't necessarily in these open.
Yes.
Mr. Abbott's a little more comfortable with those situations. But Mr. Abbott, and you know, for me, I have the two best mentors in the world. They both weren't exactly alike, but I robbed the best of both of them whenever I could. And it helped me to be a better teacher, because I never teach without thinking about either one of these guys, because they both bring different skills to the table. But I love that you appreciated that satellite.
Well, I look at it as a turning point in the school, and when that was gone, it really was a detrimental effect on a lot of kids.
Well, I'll let you know, I'm trying to bring it back.
Because when he says he stole things from both of us, you know, I would create a worksheet or I'd create a map or something, and I would put on it created by William Morton, 1993, and I would find it in his room later on. And right below where it said created by William Morton, 1993, you find it stolen by
Charles.
1996.
Hey, if it's good, it was all for the kids. I didn't sell it.
No, that's true.
I guess that brings me up to the next question. If you could bring back, Bill, I guess, has already responded to that. If you could bring back one activity or feature to the school that existed that no longer exists, that you saw a benefit, Rod,
I want to jump right on that one.
Yeah, what would it be?
I'd bring back the mini courses. I'd bring back the courses where we could concentrate on a topic like the Civil War, World War I, the Great Depression. Because while we were running those programs, I had confidence that those students went out of my room and Charlie's room and Rick McCann, that these people knew about that period of time. I had taught the other way for quite a while. You know, you start with exploration and you go as far as you can. And in doing that, you slide by an awful lot of things. Now, maybe it's important to remember Millard Fillmore. You know what I'm saying? But, and I have some experience now with teaching at the college level as well. I'm back to teaching the way I started teaching high school. You start way back, go as far as you can, hurry through everything. I did a better job of teaching history at Telstar when I could take 9 weeks and teach the Civil War. And maybe I'm wrong, but I think the Civil War and Reconstruction was more important to American history than Franklin Pierce and Millard Fillmore.
I can add to that because I see students that graduated 20 years ago, and always the first thing they say is, "You still teach those mini courses?" 20 years ago, they're still talking about that. But like any good thing in education, it goes away to be replaced by something else that somebody thinks is beneficial, not the teachers.
It reminds me of an assignment that Matt Ruby gave to some of the students down at Gould, and it was to focus on one subject, to read 2 books, not book reviews. Read the books. Don't do a lot of your research online. Do some original research. Focus on one subject. Try not to get distracted. And I think that's something I know I do. Everyone will, and Dana will vouch for that. I go to search for something on the internet, and all of a sudden I'm finding this, and I'm finding that, and I'm thinking, well, that might be useful. This would make a great program. Next thing I know, I've forgotten what I'm searching for, and that's one of the things that I miss. I keep saying when I retire, I want to unplug, because I used to write articles for magazines, and I used to do some in-depth research, and people would have specialties. It seems like so many people today are just sort of skimming the surface, generalists, and we're getting it in bits and drabs and what have you, but and we talk about students who have difficulty focusing, students, the 10% attention deficit today, and the internet is a wonderful tool, but it's certainly not helping because as someone said, the internet is like a giant library that's gone through an earthquake and everything is down on the floor, and then you're just sort of making your way through it all, and unless you're very disciplined, there's a tremendous tendency, I think, or tremendous urge to spread yourself too thin. And so I think Rod is right on the mark. I think these mini courses, and this is what we try to do here with our exhibits. We have themed exhibits, so we try to shrink it down, and we do so many of them, we keep changing them, so we try to keep things focused and try to make a difference. Anyone else want to comment on anything that is no longer at Telstar you'd like to see come back?
Obviously the mini courses were wonderful, and I wish they could come back, and maybe they will. But one of the things that I also loved that I had an opportunity to do, which I wish there were more, is I was able to team teach with Rod Abbott. And I followed a model where Rod and Helen Berry had worked for years together. And it was like a comedy show. They played off of each other, and it was like Mom and Dad are here, and sometimes, Mom's going to be a little hard, and then Rod could soften the blow. But what a wonderful model to have 2 adults in the room. Because when you teach, you're alone, and you're looking at kids, and you can't keep everything in your head. And if you're talking and you're trying to concentrate on what your delivery is, the other teacher could be there and kind of pick up on, well, this kid's going to need a little bit of a refocus, and we're going to do this over here. And I just enjoyed immensely in that team. I got to see them, and then I got to be with Rod. We taught a Black Studies course, and teaching a Black Studies course in rural Western Maine was a wonderful experience. And I learned, I was taking the course, basically Rod brought me through it, and I learned so much by taking, by helping you to teach that, but what a wonderful model to have that team teaching type of thing. And it was just fun to work together and be trying to do the same things and really be able to figure out how did we do today, you know, did we get through, who needs some help, who did we miss, that kind of stuff, so.
You know, I can't help it. I'm seeing this kid's face in my mind, you know. I taught a Native American course, which was called American Indian initially. Then I had to change it. So I just took the title and crossed it out and put a new one in, Native American. It was a 9-week course, and I'll never forget this kid. He puts up his hand. We're in week 9. We're at the end of the course. And he looks at me and he says, you know, Mr. Morton, I feel so guilty, and I don't even know a Native American. So it's kind of like learning that empathy and understanding. I don't even know a Native American.
I'd like to say something about that team teaching thing, because that was, I wish I thought to mention earlier, that was a great part of my teaching career. I loved teaching English with Helen Berry. It was, every day was an experience. And I remember she would sometimes say at the end of the day, Rodney, it's almost sinful to get paid for having so much fun. And when you can be teaching and feel that way about what you're doing, that is a wonderful thing. And we had a chance to do that sort of thing for quite a few years. But I taught with Charlie, I taught with Bev Melville, I taught with Peter Brown. I really did quite a bit of team teaching, and I recommend it very highly. It's a great experience because you build on each other's strengths.
Anyone else? Any changes? Okay, I guess before I ask my last question, I guess just in general, are there any other special memories of Telstar? And I'm not going to bake you, Rod, so you do what you want. But is there any other story that you'd like to share with the people here tonight before I ask my last question? Anything of interest? Anyone?
I'll tell you a Helen Berry story. We used to do double classrooms. There was a divide and we'd open it up so we could have a large class. And I remember this day when she was at the front and she was talking with somebody, and a student threw a piece of pencil or something at her. I think it was chalk, actually. Well, when he threw it, there was a student standing in front of her. As he threw it, the student moved. The chalk hit Helen. She came up from behind that desk more rapidly than I thought she could. And she started up that aisle, and she went right to the person who did it. And I was amazed, because I knew who did it, but she hadn't seen it. So afterwards I said, Helen, how did you know that? And she said, well, I didn't when I started, but he flinched.
Anyone else have a humorous story that will share? Okay, I guess the last question I would ask, and some of you, Bill probably has the best advantage here, but I think all of you can comment on this. As you know, Telstar opened in the fall of '68, 50 years ago, and there were students, some of whom are here tonight, who spent some of their time at Gould Academy and then ended their high school years at Telstar. And there were mixed feelings about that, and there are still, it's interesting to me to talk to some of these students who have been out for 40 years. There's still certain feelings about that, but I'm just curious to know what if any comparison can you make between Telstar and Gould, and what holdovers were there? What stories or what emotions were still there when you were involved? Do you have any sense that either competition or resentment or the relationship? It's unusual to have a high school and a boarding school both in one community, and it's kind of a unique, but also can be a stressful experience. And I'm just curious to know, anyone have any comment on that at all? Charlie?
Well, I have a lot of memories of Gould and Telstar, and it goes from great cooperation to maybe not so great cooperation. But I do remember when I was at a certain age of teaching, and there was a movement to have Gould and Telstar work together, and it was an NTL type movement. I remember spending Labor Day weekend with a group of Telstar students and a group of Gould students. We all got together down at the Garing House, and we had workshops to work together. And I remember certain individuals who might have been proud to say they were redneck, getting together, and that we did an overnight at Gould. And I just remember how wonderful it was to watch some of the students at Telstar who I knew were kind of not so pleased with Gould, and some of the Gould kids not so happy to look at Telstar, and hanging out together and conversing and having this kid come to me and go, hey, you know what, they're not so bad. And they did a play where they dressed up in the stereotype of the other school. So, you had some Gould kids dressed up in some flannel shirts and, with a fake rifle, and they're gonna go hunting, and some of the Telstar kids had dressed up in these fancy kind of clothes that were disco-y or whatever it was at the time, but for them to get together and laugh a little bit and say, you know what, you're not so bad, and listening to music together in the dorm was a highlight of when we were all working together, and the teachers were trying to work together, and we did some things with Outward Bound together with Gould. But it is a unique situation in this town, and I know there was an effort on my part to make sure that the parents of this town had a choice to stay at Telstar, and that's when we had some programs where we really tried to tell the parents that we were serious about our education. We had good teachers here, and we would give you a quality product. And I remember going to even Bill Clough, and he and I talked about, he wanted to support Telstar, and he was, he wanted that you didn't have to have so many day students, and because at the time we're always worried about ninth grade. It was like, how many kids are going to go to Gould, and is that how many kids are going to leave us? And I know we had a wonderful year once where we changed some curriculum around, made some high-level honors history courses, and it kept some kids at Telstar who might have wondered where they should go. And what was nice is they didn't regret it, and they still to this day remember their 4 years.
Well, my wife taught about 2 kids, and I would complain, I guess, as I come home about 10 students from the 8th grade going to Gould, and she always had the same answer. She says, well, we lose 10 students to Oxford Hill, that don't go to Oxford Hills from the 8th grade. I said, you've got a population of 1,200 kids, 10 doesn't make any difference. We're a school of 300, 10 makes a difference. And so my comment, I think, that I hang on as my mantra is, let's make Telstar the school of choice. And I said that to every superintendent and every principal, that we need to do things to make Telstar the school of choice.
Mhm.
Sometimes we did, and sometimes we didn't.
This is not exactly about the Google Telstar situation, but Telstar started out combining students from Woodstock High School, and Andover High School, and many that went to Google Academy. So you had 3 different populations coming into this new school, and I got there the 4th year. And it hadn't gone away yet. And they were still, well, they're from Andover. That's the Woodstock crowd. And it took really quite a few years for that. At the end of it, I don't think anybody did that not to my
It
knowledge.
was when their kids were going to Telstar.
Yeah, that's probably
when
right.
it changed.
Oh, I watched the first basketball game that Telstar ever played, and I knew where the kids were from, and they all were wearing the same uniform. But an Andover kid would come down dribbling, and he'd look, and he was going to pass over here, and he'd see that was a student from Woodstock, and he wouldn't. He'd go over here. I mean, that to me was. It took a long time to get over that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But they're having their 50th reunion this year. The last class that had local students at Gould.
Right.
And they have, because that was Charlie in my first year at Gould. So he's been spending a great amount of time, far more than he does on his own reunions, working with those kids. And I think it's going to be very interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
You know, we're working now with a class of 68, and if you haven't been on our website, all of the Telstar yearbooks have been, let me see, up to 89 have been scanned and are all online. And as often happens, the earlier yearbooks have a lot more material in them, a lot more writing. The later ones are more colorful, what have you. Same thing with Gould Academy. A lot of those are online, but they're a great resource, and that was one of the things that we were happy to do, and we thank Charlie very much for making those yearbooks available to us. Now that things can be scanned, it's great that we don't need to provide the space for the actual books. It's nice to have them. I will never give up my books, and I'm not 100% confident and trusting, as Will hears all the time. Digital records, I know that they can disappear, and I still like microfilm and what have you. So
Do you have copies of all of them?
we have
You
copies.
have them all?
Yeah, we have 90. What is it? You scanned 18. Well, we have 90 to 17 still to scan, and the Oklahoma Correctional Facility does our scanning for us. They do this as a training exercise for inmates in a very high-tech scanning lab with expensive equipment, and they're in such demand they will do yearbooks for free for organizations, and they've worked with libraries, historical societies throughout the region, that they're a bit behind. They also do other scanning projects for a certain fee, so it's a great training program for inmates, and of course there's a big demand for this. So there's some jobs out there as soon as they get out, but we have done Goulds. They did those, and then we got the word that they could only do a certain number, so we did up to 89, and the others are still next door, and we're ready to do 90 through 17. I was glad because most of the students that I knew, either through my brief teaching experience at Telstar or through their volunteering at the Historical Society, and I kept in touch with a lot of them, are all featured in those earlier, mostly 1970s and 1980s yearbooks. Well, I thank you all very, very much for sharing these stories, and before I turn it over to the audience, I'm sure some of you may have some questions or comments, and I hope you will have some for the panelists here. I'll just share my one story that stands out in my mind among other things. As I mentioned, my experience at Telstar brought me here to the Historical Society through the main history course that I was teaching, and got involved through the society with Kathy Newell and with Raleigh Chapman, and we met on the second floor of this building in early 1974 when the society's collection amounted to about 3 cardboard boxes of material. We have a little bit more than that now. And so I do like to remind Stan, the first curator director at the back of the room, that I was in the building before he was here, though I wasn't hired first. But one experience, people will ask me, because I also am familiar with some of the teachers at Gould, past and present, having studied the history, and they'll say, well, did you know this person, that person? They say, well, did you ever teach at Gould? And I say, yes. But it was only for part of a day, and Bill's probably the only person who would remember this. In or maybe Rod, in 74, we had a bomb scare, and so we had to evacuate the high school. And the easiest way to do that was to go across the street to the Catholic Church. So and Rod remembers this, so this was in the winter, and there was a lot of snow on that building. And if you know anything about the Catholic Church, you know it's kind of an unusually designed, shaped building. So we all packed in there. We all got into the church, and after probably about half an hour, 20 minutes or half an hour, we could hear this creaking noise. And I remember a couple of the teachers would look up, and they'd look up at the roof, and the framing and what have you, and the timbers, and you'd hear a snap, and you'd hear a creak. And then the word came, I don't know if it was from the superintendent or whatever, that we needed to get out of that building. And it turned out that that Hanscom Hall was empty at the time. So we all hopped on buses and we headed up to Gould Academy. And I finished, I don't know how long we were there. We weren't there all day, I don't think, but we were there for a while. So I got onto the third floor and had my class on the third floor. So I did teach very briefly at Gould Academy. So that's my story. Who here anyone have a comment or a question for anyone here at all? Please feel free. This is they're here and they're trapped at the moment. This is your one opportunity. So anyone have any comments or questions for them? Donnie?
Yeah, I just want to say that I never had Rodney for teaching, but I'm one of those people that are on Facebook and then currently being taught by Rodney almost on a daily basis. I have too much time on my hands.
That's all right. That could be a good thing if Rodney's teaching you. That's all right.
It certainly is.
Absolutely.
Anyone else?
I'm just curious about Telstar. I see. Oh goodness, this is my son calling. I respect that. Never mind. I gotta go. Another time. Yeah.
Jan?
Well, I go back a long while. And my husband Dexter was chair of the school board and was on the executive committee at Gould Academy at the time of the transition. And it was stressful. Many telephone messages, and of course, I remember them hiring Ralph Ryder, and being excited about that. It was a really interesting time. It was an exciting time, and we were excited about the school and the design and all the new ideas. And
But there were a lot of emotions.
but a lot of emotions in town, you can imagine.
Yeah.
Of course, Dexter had gone to Gould, but two of my daughters started at Telstar, and the third one went to Gould the whole time. Betsy was in that first class.
We're very fortunate in the archives at the Society, thanks to Jan's donation and her daughter Nancy's donation. We have many of Dexter's papers when he was on the board at Gould and at SAD 44. And we've been tossing around, I think Kathy and I have been talking about this, it's been since 1976 since a history of Gould Academy was published. And that whole period in the 1960s when the creation of SAD 44 was being discussed, we have Ed Vashon's notes about, was Gould going to become a private boarding school? Was it going to be a campus of the University of Maine? Was it going to add vocational courses? All sorts of options. And so we're thinking that as we continue to move items from the academy and preserve them in our climate-controlled vaults, that a real focus should be a new history or a summary of events at Gould, at least, from 1960 up to 2010, a 50-year period that covers that transition, which Francis Parkman, I think, did a pretty decent job of describing. And he didn't beat around the bush. If you read the blue book, The History of Gould, Gould had a lot of ups and downs, and you know, that was one of the big changes was when Telstar opened. That drained a lot of students from Gould Academy, and they were scurrying to try to make ends meet, and that was, it was a major financial drain, and they were out there looking for the students, and you know, some of the same costs were still in place, but the student body wasn't, and so there were, you know, definite connections there.
I'd just like to mention the formation of it. You remember they had the committee of 100? It was folks from all the towns in SAD 44 got together, 100 people, and they worked together to form the SAD 44. But I remember it was the committee of 100. Yeah.
I know we have booklets, and there were you know, all kinds of leaflets and pamphlets and things that were handed out.
They got together and formed it.
You know, for these discussions.
Really exciting.
You know, a real promotional piece that we put on Facebook with plans for the school and before and after pictures, what the students have now and what they will have once Telstar opens. Yeah. All right, Amy?
This might have been what Carly was going to ask, but why Yosemite Sam? Why the Rebels? Why the Confederate flag for a high school in Western Maine? I mean, how was that decision
I didn't
made?
do it, Rodney.
I know about when they stopped flying the Confederate flag.
I was hoping that wouldn't come up.
Sorry, Rod.
Well, this is how I remember it. I came to Telstar the fourth year of its existence, and I remember one of the first things that I was surprised about was the Confederate flag. Because I realized that it was somebody else's symbol, is how I always tried to explain it. I mean, you can't take somebody else's symbol and adopt it as your own without adopting what it meant to them. And we did that, well, they did that, because I wasn't there at the time. They did that twice. They did it with the Confederate flag, and then they did it with Yosemite Sam. Now, I had taught at Buckfield, little school in Weston, Maine. I don't have one here with me, but I remember the yearbook pretty well. It's maroon, and it has a buck's head with its antlers, was kind of a wreath around it, you know. It was their symbol. They drew it. They made it.
Yeah.
I went to Livermore Falls, and what was it up there? The Lumberman or something like that. And you had a lumberjack. It came from them. And then I came to Telstar, and that Confederate flag did not come from here. It's very, very clear it didn't. And I remember when Ted Davis, God bless that man, asked me to speak to the student body about that. And I will never forgive him for this. Not that I love Ted Davis, he's a great guy, but what the setting that he created, or they created, I came out to the auditorium knowing that 90% of those students are going to hate every word that I say, right? And the backdrop behind the podium was probably one of the largest Confederate flags in America. So if you can just imagine a worse scenario for somebody that's trying to talk about changing that thing right there, it was not a fun thing to do. But one of the things that I tried to explain in that little talk that I did was, go to your Civil War monument. Read the names. They're the same names as your classmates. Those people went and fought to save the Union. And they would be horrified to come back and see that your school symbol is the flag that represented the force they fought against. And then the Yosemite Sam, oh, by the way, I think, you remember Mr. Kersey? Mr. Kersey, wonderful man. I think he had something to do with that Confederate flag.
yes.
No
you did.
I can
question.
do that.
Yeah,
I can do that, yeah. Tim had just come back from getting his master's degree at the University of Mississippi.
No kidding, I didn't know that.
So, you know, you also have to understand that 1968 is not 2018. It's, we're living in a whole different world.
I think they
Completely.
wanted the rebels.
Well,
Yes.
and the kids did that.
Yeah.
They thought rebels fit in perfect because we were definitely rebels. We were doing something different. It was rebellious against education in all the traditional forms. It was definitely different, and rebels fit right in. I think rebels was better than, you know, the flag. But the flag just appeared. The paper didn't even know what to call us. The first article in the paper was Telstar satellites lose football game to somebody. Telstar satellites, that wasn't bad, you know. But yeah, the rebel thing came.
Pretty new.
And I love Tim Kersey. Don't get me wrong, but I mean it was just happened to be. Those things just happen, you know. You don't think about it until
But it
later.
took them 20 years
Yes.
to get rid of it. That was,
And I got to support Rodney on this because as I was driving up here from Naples, it's a little bit lengthy drive. I mean, I was thinking, okay, somebody's going to ask me, you know, what was a turning point in Telstar history or something like that. The speech he gave, the speech he gave was something it was unbelievable. I don't even know how to describe it. I said time after time, no one else in that building could have done it.
No, no way. And I had the pleasure of being able to look at the faces of the kids because I really was scared in that setting. And this courageous act to go up and do this was amazing. But when he started that and he mentioned it about talking about the monument and the names, and it really educated me as to how many names were on those monuments and in my classroom. And the kids, I watched some kids melt because he mentioned the names and it was their name. And instead of we're going to be angry about this, not so much, because that was the beauty of what you taught them.
And for me, it was his opening line. Because he said in the opening line, and this is so true, and every kid in that auditorium knew it, I have listened to you many, many, many times, and I'm asking you to listen to me this time. It was a fantastic way to start that speech.
and the funny thing was, I thought, was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago, you communicated with me because I had misleadingly said that I had a copy of your speech in my desk and I couldn't find it. So somehow this was transmitted to Facebook and Tim Chapman, who lives up in Berlin, produced the copy of the thing.
Oh, no
And they
kidding.
So
printed it in the paper.
he has hung on to that
Really?
for the 20-some years, and I'm sure many of the other students did
Oh.
too.
Interesting.
Well, thank you for that. But at the time, I can tell you, when I finished, there was not as many people applauding as there were.
But there wasn't a riot either, so.
No, I managed to drag myself up there to listen to it.
Yeah.
I go to
No,
the
it
assemblies,
was
but.
a great Telstar moment.
Anyone else? Well, thank you very, very much. Thank you all our panelists, and thank you for some good questions. And congratulations to Telstar on its 50th anniversary. I headed down the other day and took some photographs, and it brought back some pretty good memories. I had a good experience at Telstar, and a good experience continuing to know a lot of the students afterwards who came here. A lot of them were involved as volunteers, and now I visit with their grandchildren, and you know, I feel old, but it was bound to happen. That's the way I look at it.
At the end, I was teaching grandchildren,
Yep.
all the students.
Oh, yeah.
This is what happens to us, Bill, when we stay in the same place for a long
Oh,
time.
and
The other thing is senior college, we still are going down to Telstar.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Senior-
oh,
to
yeah.
senior college.
That's right.
Yeah. But I think,
That's so
you know, for
good.
all of us, we have a special place in our hearts for Telstar, and we all have various memories, but regardless of all the changes that have taken place in the world, and at the school as well, there have been a lot of changes since it opened. It's still, in many ways, it's still the same place, and hopefully it'll be there for the next 50. So thank you all.
Before you
Bill,
close, is there
sure.
something I'd like to do?
Sure.
Rodney, come around the front. Charlie, come around the front.
Uh-oh. Who knows? It's the next Telstar moment.
This is represent, whoever possesses this, it represents the senior person on staff. And, come on there, Pokey.
So that me.
So in 2001, I was blessed to receive this from Rodney. And he had some very wonderful things to say to me, and said to the audience at that time, he'll probably be hanging on to that for a while. So don't wait to get it, whoever was out there, right? So it was so wonderful that he did that, and especially that he passed it to me, that I even read a little bit of a Robert Frost poem at that moment to him, so that I've come a long way. But what I wanted to do is have him hold it up, and you know how when you're choosing up signs to baseball?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, well, don't go all the way to the bottom, but let me get right here. No. So, I'm gonna pass this along to somebody that I respect highly, and he's been calling me his mentor, which means I'm old. But I wanted you to get the top of it. No, hang on. Can you reach the top? No. Yes, get your thumb up there. Okay, I want a picture now. Thank you, Dana. All set? Okay, you got it. There it is. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks so much for coming, and hope to see you next week. A lot of things still to come before Christmas at the Mason House.
Okay.